Wow.
I have very mixed views regarding the movie Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, but I'm unhappily leaning toward disliking it nearly entirely. However, there were certain elements in the movie that I really like, so I'm unhappy in how everything came out. It somewhat reminds me of how I felt when I first saw movies like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and Thor: Love and Thunder. It's difficult to say precisely when the movie loses its way, but I did really enjoy the first half, if not the first third, since the second half was just terrible. If you do decide to watch this movie in the cinemas, I recommend seeing the first act as it was the most complex and thoughtful, especially with the scenes that focused on Janet Van Dyne and Kang, which were excellent. So, after that, I changed my stance from being like, you just gotta see this movie, to admitting you can wait to stream it if you're already not in a rush to go watch it. What's even more depressing is that this movie is pretty incriminating evidence that Marvel is not trying to fix the problems a lot of fans have identified. The script for this movie, for instance, suffers from having too many characters and needing to do too much in one sitting in order to build up future projects. The concept of Easter eggs is one of the main causes of this issue, and while I enjoy Easter eggs just as much as the next person, this movie was overshadowed by all the teasing and setup it had to do, like showcasing 2 generations of Ant-Man and the Wasp, teasing the Young Avengers, further exploring the quantum realm, and officially introducing Kang, etc. In this movie, Kang the Conqueror is introduced in a wonderful way, but it quickly devolves into a disaster. You haven't seen anything yet if you thought Jonathan Majors' performance in Loki was ridiculous, because, well, in Loki it was far more complex and nuanced than the Kang we see today in this film, which is why I more or less praised and justified his performance in that specific episode. Instead of developing a true character in this movie, Kang is written more like a spoof on the character from what you would see in like Saturday Night Live. The fact that Kang's kingdom, Chronopolis, isn't even located in the quantum realm in the comics, and the two have only sparred occasionally as comic book characters, makes it seem like a strange creative decision for Kang's first major battle to be against Ant-Man of all heroes. It's also odd that throughout the whole Ant-Man trilogy, Scott has only faced up against one real Ant-Man antagonist. This is a tremendous wasted opportunity because many of Ant-Man's antagonists are so humanized, so ground level. The first half of this film, where we're dealing with Kang's emergence, and you're not sure if he's a threat for sure, with him existing in that gray zone, with his charisma making him like a wolf in sheep's clothing, is much more interesting to watch than when he goes full Saturday morning cartoon villain in the second half of the movie, which in my opinion really undercuts him as a long-term villain. Also, this movie proves how an entire Ant-Man story should not revolve around and or take place in the quantum realm, which is not explored in as best of a way as possible, and is used more as a plot device in its own right, and as a CGI smorgasbord mashup of stuff like Spy Kids, Mad Max, and Star Wars, and even Guardians of the Galaxy motifs, complete with character ripoffs and rejects. Even though I did like several aspects of this movie, I still have some criticisms. The familial dynamics between the parents and their adult children, as well as the understandings and respect that is developed between them, were handled quite well here, especially with the acting from Paul Rudd and Michelle Pfeiffer, because we so rarely get that in Hollywood films. But this family dynamics being played up in the film did make me wonder where Maggie and Paxton are. Why are they abandoning 2 entire parental figures in Cassie's life in this film? Heck, where were Maggie and Paxton during Endgame? Was Cassie just living by herself? Who knows? In my opinion, Maggie and Paxton should have at least survived the blip so Cassie could build a stronger bond with them, which could have been used to contrast the fact that Scott has been gone for a good portion of her life in this film. It's so obvious it was literally staring them right in the face. Jonathan Majors' portrayal of Kang is both interesting and terrifying when he is allowed to be himself and really indulge himself in the role. However, when watching, you really have no clue what Kang is really attempting to accomplish, how he's going to do it, why he's going to do it, or even why he's in the quantum realm, since he largely speaks in riddles as the movie goes on. As a result, he loses a lot of depth. It was challenging to feel involved in what was occurring because of the mechanics of Kang's powers aren't even sufficiently explained to raise any stakes. And speaking of a villain who enjoys monologuing, Kang was almost comical in the final act when he was monologuing non-stop and still really had nothing of substance to say. It actually makes me feel a little sorry for Jonathan Majors because Peyton Reed, the director, Jeff Loveness, the writer, and the entire Marvel crew weren't really looking out for him or his character and left him to suffer the internet's contempt for decisions that were either forced upon him or made for him. At the very least, Marvel should have trusted their writers, directors, and producers to let them know when something wasn't working. Also, I think we've identified that these Rick and Morty screenwriters in particular are a problem for Marvel, and yet they keep hiring and rehiring them. It's truly mind-boggling. And speaking of the film's director, Peyton Reed, he does a solid job here, certainly the finest of the trilogy as a whole, but now that all is truly over, I sincerely wished things had been resolved with Edgar Wright, who at least cast Paul Rudd before departing due to creative disagreements. Peyton Reed did a solid job of directing the calmer scenes in the quantum realm in the initial portion of the movie, despite the fact that it's derivative of almost everything, ranging from Doctor Strange to Star Wars to even Guardians of the Galaxy. On the downside, Quantumania disappointingly lacks any solid action sequences. The Ant-Man movie's recontextualizations of the magnitude of common everyday things is its best feature. The whole thing becomes pointless and dull when Scott's surroundings are changed to clunky alien VFX. The character who really experiences the most action, though, is Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne, the original Wasp, and the action scenes with her as the star were so expertly executed, you'd still think she was at the pinnacle of her powers as a hero. I wish Michelle was the primary Wasp in the MCU rather than the retired version, since she is as wonderful as Janet Van Dyne here as she was as Catwoman in Batman Returns. That's not to argue that Evangeline Lilly, who plays Hope Van Dyne, the second generation Wasp, doesn't do a good job. In fact, she makes a pretty strong impression despite relatively little screen time. Nonetheless, she does have some very moving parts in the movie concerning her parents. As Ant-Man, Paul Rudd continues to be a revelation, displaying a hit of Edgar Wright's sensibilities that presumably didn't mesh with Marvel. Rudd sells his parts not only as a parent but as a superhero who represents the little guy both figuratively and literally, which the film points out very effectively. Rudd is really amusing in the beginning sequences in San Francisco and just has so much heart. And Catherine Newton as Scott Lang's daughter, Cassie, does a fine job, not good enough that they needed to fire Emma Fuhrmann from Endgame, as she could have done a performance on par with this. Bill Murray is actually pretty good in his small but pivotal scene, and as for William Jackson Harper and Katie O'Brien, it's a real shame that this is all they get to show for their time in the MCU. Hopefully, for at least William, he can be like Gemma Chan and just get casted in a bigger, more fulfilling role in the MCU's future. As for the character of MODOK, played by Corey Stoll, he appears to be the VFX team's personal act of whole retaliation, since there is a recurring joke about how the characters respond to him and how he is just hideous to look at. However, this joke isn't very funny because you don't really think you're looking at anything that is genuine or real. It's probably one of the worst VFX I've ever seen in a modern professionally produced movie. Simply put, you don't even think it's a real creature or human being. Moreover, despite the fact that in all honesty, he might make a better adversary for an Ant-Man movie, he is not necessary at all for this specific movie. He is wholly wasted and the character is more or less butchered, and more proof that not all characters really can do a proper adaptation from page to screen. And it also shows how this movie isn't really an Ant-Man movie. It's just a stepping stone, like a building block to another project in the multiverse saga that just happens to have Ant-Man and the Wasp in it. And I think that might be this film's biggest flaw. Bottom line, if you see this movie for anything, see it for Jonathan Majors, Paul Rudd's, and Michelle Pfeiffer's performances, as well as the 2 end credit scenes. And if you're not a big blockbuster fan, or you're not a part of the MCU hype train, or have hopped off the hype train years ago, this is still pretty skippable, and you could probably just wait to stream it in a couple months or so. So that was my non-spoiler review of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. What did you think? What did you think of the movie if you've seen it already? And what did you think of this video? Share all your thoughts and comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And also follow me on Instagram so you never miss the latest updates on when videos of mine are coming out. And to also just like and admire some fan art of mine that I regularly post on there. Some of that should be showing up on the screen right now. Alright. And if you want to know my Instagram tag right now so you can follow me immediately, that should be showing up on the screen right now. Alright. Goodbye everyone. Thank you for watching.